His name was Daniel. He was 53 years old, sitting in the parking lot of a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and he could not make himself open the car door. He had driven 40 minutes to get there. He had made the appointment 3 weeks earlier. The doctor was waiting. And yet, Daniel sat there for an hour and 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel of his Ford F-150, staring at the entrance, and then drove home without ever going inside. He never rescheduled. 2 years later, the thing he had been afraid to find out about was found out anyway. And by then, it was much harder to fix. Daniel's story is not a story about a man who was weak. It is a story about a brain that was doing exactly what it was designed to do. And that design, that ancient, invisible architecture that hijacks your decisions before you even know a decision is being made, is one of the most powerful, most dangerous, and least understood forces in human history. Today, we are going inside it. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. What you are about to hear is not a self-help lecture. It is not a motivational talk. It is a documented, research-backed, historically grounded examination of a pattern that has been showing up in human behavior for over 100,000 years and is still running your life today, whether you are aware of it or not. The pattern is this: the human brain, when it encounters anything it perceives as a threat, does not distinguish between a lion in the grass and a dream that might fail. It does not know the difference between a physical danger and an emotional one. It processes the idea of asking your boss for a raise and the idea of being eaten alive with nearly identical neurological urgency. And once you understand that fully, once you truly see what that means for every decision you have ever made, you will never look at your own hesitation the same way again. To understand what fear actually is and what it does inside you, we need to go back to the work of a neuroscientist named Joseph Ledoux, who spent more than 30 years at New York University studying what happens inside the brain when it encounters a threat. Ledoux's research focused on the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep inside the brain, and its contribution to the detection of threats and the control of the body's responses when danger is perceived. Psychology today, what Ledoux found, and what decades of neuroscience have since confirmed, is that this system operates at a speed that bypasses conscious thought entirely. Before your rational mind has processed what it is looking at, before you have formed a single coherent sentence in your head about what is happening, your amygdala has already flooded your body with cortisol and adrenaline and put your muscles on alert. The decision to be afraid happens without your permission. It has always happened without your permission. That is the design. Now here is where it gets remarkable. The amygdala detects and organizes responses not only to natural dangers like predators, but also learns about novel threats and the stimuli that predict their occurrence. Science direct. In plain language, it learns. It stores emotional memories. It remembers the first time you were humiliated in front of people, and it files that memory under the same category as physical danger. It remembers the first time you took a risk and it did not work out. The first time you trusted someone completely and they used that trust against you. Every one of those experiences gets logged as a threat signature. And from that point forward, anything that resembles those experiences even loosely, even distantly, triggers the same alarm. This is not a malfunction. This is the system working exactly as it was built to work. But it was built for a world that no longer exists. Consider what life was like for a man roughly 100,000 years ago on the African savanna. The consequences of underestimating a threat were immediate and fatal. If you saw movement in the grass and you decided it was probably nothing, and it turned out to be a predator, you were dead. There was no second chance to recalibrate. So the brain evolved a radical bias. Assume the worst. Always. Err on the side of danger. False alarms cost you nothing. Missing a real threat costs you everything. That asymmetry is baked into every human brain that has ever existed, including yours. The problem is that in the modern world, that same asymmetry is costing men everything in a completely different way. It is costing them the conversation they never had, the business they never built, the relationship they never repaired, the version of themselves they never became because the alarm kept going off and they kept treating it like evidence. This is where history comes in. Because the pattern that fear creates, the particular shape it leaves on human decisions, is not new. It shows up with startling consistency across centuries and civilizations. And when you learn to read it, you start seeing it everywhere. In 44 BC, on the floor of the Roman Senate, one of the most documented cases of collective fear-driven paralysis in recorded history played out in real time. The philosopher and statesman Cicero, one of the most brilliant legal minds Rome ever produced, wrote extensively in the weeks surrounding the assassination of Julius Caesar about the particular kind of dread that had gripped Rome's most powerful men for years before that moment. He described senators who knew that Caesar's consolidation of power was dangerous. Men who had the political standing, the alliances, the resources to act earlier. Men who chose silence instead, not because they lacked intelligence, not because they lacked courage in every other sense of the word, but because the cost of acting felt immediate and certain, while the cost of not acting felt distant and theoretical. The brain always overweights the immediate. That is the design. The senators waited, and in waiting, they helped create the very crisis they had been afraid of. Now take that same pattern and watch it surface in folklore, because the ancient storytellers understood something about fear that modern psychology has only recently been able to measure and confirm. Every major mythological tradition in the world, from Norse to West African to Native American to Celtic, has a version of the same story. A man stands at a threshold. On the other side of that threshold is something he needs, something his life cannot fully become without, but the passage is guarded. Sometimes the guardian is a monster. Sometimes it is a riddle. Sometimes it is simply the dark. In his landmark 1949 work, Joseph Campbell described the structure of the mythological hero's journey as a hero who ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder, where fabulous forces are encountered and a decisive victory is won. Wikipedia, but what Campbell was really documenting underneath all the mythology was a psychological map. The threshold guardian in every hero story is not an external force. It is the internal one. It is the part of the hero that says, "You are not ready. You are not worthy. You will fail. Turn back." In every tradition, across every culture, the hero who turns back is the one history forgets. The one who walks through is the one whose story gets told for 1,000 years. Here is a man whose story very nearly did not get told. His name was Raymond. He grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in Gary, Indiana, the son of a steelworker who worked double shifts and came home exhausted and said very little. Raymond was good with numbers in a way that his teachers found remarkable. His high school math teacher, a man named Mr. Kendrick, told Raymond directly and without hesitation that he should apply to engineering programs at major universities. Raymond took the application forms home. He filled them out in pencil in his bedroom. He never submitted them. He told himself it was because of money, because of logistics, because it was not practical. But 30 years later, sitting in the break room of the auto parts warehouse where he had worked for 22 years, Raymond told a younger colleague the truth. He said he had been terrified, not of failing the program, terrified of succeeding, because succeeding would have meant leaving. It would have meant becoming someone different from everyone around him. It would have meant standing out in a way that felt, to the 17-year-old version of him, more dangerous than staying invisible. The amygdala cannot distinguish between a lion and the fear of becoming too much. Raymond's brain filed both of them under the same heading: threat. Avoid. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca, writing nearly 2,000 years ago, observed that there are more things likely to frighten us than there are to crush us, and that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The now, He wrote that from a position of hard experience. Seneca lived under Emperor Nero, a ruler so volatile that Rome's intellectuals and statesmen spent decades performing elaborate emotional management just to survive proximity to power. He watched brilliant men shrink themselves. He watched them make themselves smaller, quieter, less visible, to avoid the threat of Nero's attention. And what Seneca noticed, what he documented in letter after letter to his friend Lucilius, is that the shrinking did not protect them. The imagined threat they were managing, the version of danger they had constructed in their minds, was almost always larger and more consuming than the actual danger ever turned out to be. The fear of the thing cost them more than the thing itself ever would have. Now take all of this, the neuroscience, the historical pattern, the mythology, the lived experience of men like Daniel and Raymond, and hold it together for a moment. Because there is a second layer that the research reveals, and it is the layer that changes everything. Psychologists have documented that many people will go to extreme measures to avoid feeling regret, and that the desire to avoid regret shapes the way decisions are made in profound ways. Wikipedia, but here is what that finding actually means in practice. The very mechanism that is supposed to protect you from pain is, in many cases, the direct cause of it. The man who never has the difficult conversation in his marriage because he is afraid of where it might lead is not avoiding pain. He is producing it, slowly, at a rate that will eventually exceed whatever he was originally afraid of. The man who never makes the career change is not staying safe. He is accumulating a debt that will eventually come due, compounded. Fear told him he was protecting himself. What fear was actually doing was protecting the discomfort of the status quo at the expense of the life that was waiting on the other side of it. This is the pattern. This is the hidden architecture. Fear presents itself as wisdom. Fear presents itself as caution, as practicality, as maturity, as knowing your limits. And in doing so, it becomes invisible. You cannot fight something you cannot see. You cannot choose differently when you do not recognize that a choice is being made. The men who break this pattern, the ones who manage to distinguish between the alarm and the actual threat, are not the ones who feel less fear. The research does not support that story. What the research shows, and what history confirms, is that the men who move through the pattern are the ones who learn to interrogate it, who learn to ask, when the alarm goes off, is this a lion, or is this a dream? Is this danger real, or is this my brain filing a modern problem under an ancient heading? That question, asked honestly, with the willingness to sit with the discomfort of not knowing the answer immediately, is one of the most powerful acts a human being can perform. It is more powerful than confidence. It is more powerful than motivation, because it operates at the level of the mechanism itself. Daniel eventually did go back to the hospital. It took him another 14 months after that day in the parking lot. The diagnosis he received was difficult but manageable. The doctor told him, quietly, that if he had come in 2 years earlier, the conversation would have been considerably easier. Daniel sat with that for a long time, not in self-recrimination, but in something closer to recognition. He told a friend later, "I knew the whole time what I was doing. I just did not know why. Now I do. And now it is different." That is the only ending this story was ever going to have. Not a man who conquered fear. A man who finally understood it well enough to stop letting it make his decisions for him. There is a version of that ending available to every person watching this. But it starts with seeing the pattern. And now, you have seen it. What is the one decision in your life right now where fear is presenting itself as something else? Where the alarm is running and you have been calling it wisdom or patience or practicality? Drop it in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from and what door you have been standing in front of. You might be surprised how many people are standing in front of the exact same one. Next week, we go inside one of the most well-documented phenomena in modern behavioral science. Why intelligent people, consistently and predictably, make choices that work directly against their own interests, and the historical pattern that predicted it centuries before the research caught up. we find the patterns history try to hide. Stay with us.